Welcome to Ponchatoula Live, the show where we make it easy for you to connect with the people of Ponchatoula. I'm your host, Parker Layrisson, and today I've got a fantastic guest. This is one of the most successful, yet humble and good natured people I know. I've known him for decades. We have plenty of mutual friends. Once upon a time, we were young lawyers together. As you can see, I'm no longer young, and he's no longer a private practicing attorney. He's now a judge. Speaking, of course, about Judge Jeff Oglesbee, the soon-to-be Chief Judge of the 21st Judicial District Court in Amy and also Livingston and also St. Helena. And he's a family court judge. So, Judge, with no further ado, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Good afternoon, Parker. Thank you so much for having me this afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Just a little bit about myself. I grew up in Hammond, but I guess my ties to Ponchatoula, my mom was a very long time English teacher at Ponchatoula High School. I think she had the pleasure of teaching you a thing or two.
Yes, she was one of my favorite teachers and perhaps my first teacher. No, I take it back. I think Coach Peggy Allred was the first class I took there, and I had your mom's honors English class second. So yeah. Well, Miss Pat Oglesbee, she's a legend around here. Anybody who went through PHS would remember her fondly.
Yeah, she has some really fond memories of Ponchatoula High School, and I think she still gets together with many of the retired teachers about once a month so they can talk about the good old times. And
that's neat.
My dad, Tom Oglesbee, was a longtime pharmacist with Eckerd Drugs in the Ponchatoula and Hammond area, and he kind of moved up through the ranks with Eckerd Drugs. So we do have a few ties here to Ponchatoula, despite the fact that I grew up in Hammond.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And, for folks that are maybe newer to the show, you'll know that while most of the people that sit in the interview chair where the judge is now live in Ponchatoula now or once did, many others don't because they serve this area. So we've had all these, public officials, doctors at North Oaks, et cetera, that I want to share because you're doing so much for our community. And in your case, of course, Judge, if somebody needs family court services, you or the other judge, Judge Jeff Cash, are going to be one of the two people they see. So it's important we get to know you better. But I certainly appreciate, you mentioning your mom. She was one of my favorites. I remember well my knees knocking that first day at PHS coming from itty bitty St. Joseph's School, my class of 24. As I recall, there were 16 boys and 8 girls. And then we hit big old PHS where there were just hundreds and hundreds of kids in every class. And I'm not too proud to admit I was scared, and your mom helped ease that and just get us, right into literature and all the other fun stuff with English. So let's talk about you and growing up in Hammond, because, you are a sister city, so to speak, right to the north. And as you mentioned, if your dad's working down here, your mom's working down here, you certainly probably spent some time down here the same way I did going to work with my daddy in Amite as a child when I was out of school. So what was life like for you in Hammond? What part of town did you grow up in, and what was it like back then?
Yeah, we actually grew up down the road off of Little Italy Road, down Range Road, and it was great. I have 2 younger brothers, Brian, who's a year younger than me, and my brother Todd, who's 5 years younger than me. And it was a great childhood growing up. A lot different than it is now. In some ways. Hammond, Ponchatoula was a little bit smaller of a community. We've grown, which is a good thing, but I think we've tried to do some smart growth around here. So, but still, it's a lot of people. If anybody's driven through this area knows. I had a great childhood, great parents, taught me well, raised me right. It was a wonderful childhood. I went to Holy Ghost in Hammond, and I was fortunate enough to be in the second graduating class at St. Thomas Aquinas High School over in Hammond. And back then, I don't know if you're familiar with St. Thomas's history, but we added a class at a time. So you talk about a small school. When I was there as a freshman, it was just about 30 something kids ahead of me, and we kind of all grew up together. So it's been really interesting and nice to watch that school grow as well.
I bet that's so exciting. And Ponchatoula not having its own Catholic school, with St. Joseph ending at 8th grade, that is the regional Catholic school. So now there's so many people in our community. In fact, I have a niece there now, Hunter Grace Layrisson. Hunter Grace, I know you're not watching. You're too cool to watch this show. But I want you to know I'm proud of you. She got her academic letter or award this week for making a 30 on her ACT.
I
But
saw that.
my
We
nephews
certainly
go
want
there.
to make sure we acknowledge all those students who are doing so well, including Hunter.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's neat because now it is a fully formed school. My kids run cross country for St. Joseph, and that's where they do the little track meets. And they've got these facilities, a football field, baseball field, softball field, all this stuff that wasn't around when I was in school. But I remember them coming to school to do the recruiting trip. By the time they reached me, I was, about your brother Todd's age. So they barely had 4 classes at that point, but it was tiny. And I think only 2 of our 24 kids at St. Joseph chose to go there, or their parents chose to go there. And my parents gave us a choice, and it was like, wait, my buddies are going there. I wasn't brave enough to try something new, but it had to be neat to be kind of a charter member of the school and see it grow. So
it was my mom really loves Ponchatoula High School. I know she enjoyed teaching there, but she and my father have both grown up in Catholic education, and that was really a strong part of their faith, was to make sure they passed that down to their children. I'm grateful that they did that. It really formed a good basis for me. I'm sure I would have done fantastic at Ponchatoula or Hammond High School, because I think those are both fantastic schools. But for me and my family, it really was a blessing. It was nice to grow up in such a small school like that. And,
yes.
Interestingly enough, Judge Jeff Cash and I were both in the same graduating class at St. Thomas, and now we're both family court judges. So I guess we did something right.
Right. So yeah, we have this 3-parish district with hundreds and hundreds of attorneys, and there you guys are at the top of the heap on the bench. That's pretty cool. I think one of my closest friends, Britt Leon, and your brother Todd were really close, and
oh yeah,
Britt lived out on Little Italy Road too. That's a fun place, and it's still a great area, even with all the growth around Hammond. That's just a wonderful road because you have access to the city not far away. The highways and all are not hard to get to, but you still have kind of a country road, kind of feel to it. It had to be a neat place to grow up.
My first job in high school was working at it's now Bonings, but it used to be the A&P grocery store. And
yeah,
I turned 15 years old, got a driver's license, and my dad had me a job there working so I could pay for the gas.
That was a tough get back in the day. I had lunch with John Boning on Tuesday, and we were reminiscing about the evolution of Boning's supermarkets and the Boning's empire. You might remember John's Curb Market was a thing when we were kids. And I remember them being kind of all over, but he told me they had 18 of those at one point, and they wisely pivoted away from convenience stores and into more grocery stores. And clearly it's worked out well for them. But my first cousin, John Vaughn, not first cousin, but my cousin John Vaughn was also a bag boy there at Boning's back in the day. And I remember that being kind of a tough get. My little brother Louie worked at Winn-Dixie next to your dad's old pharmacy. Yeah. But all those grocery store jobs were good gigs. I worked at kind of a grocer at Berrytown Produce in high school, in addition to Hi-Ho. And I saw one of the owners, Mr. Ronnie Henderson, yesterday. And he was telling that Miss Cindy was talking about, all the old bag boys. And we were talking about actually putting together a little reunion, which might be cool, because at this point they've had like hundreds of people, go through there.
Yeah.
But you got to love those jobs. I mean, what did you learn? I look back on my Hi-Ho experience in particular, because I was there 4 years and working the counter at Hi-Ho. I learned so many skills from Mr. John Gazzardo, senior and junior, and the other folks there that have served me well in practice of law. How to treat people, how to put their interests first, how, customer service that would make people smile, coming in and leaving. What did you learn bagging groceries and stocking shelves or doing whatever else you did at Bonings that served you well in your legal career?
I don't know exactly how it translates to the legal career, but it did teach me a lot about responsibility. I was a young man, 15, 16 years old, had to be someplace on time. I had to do my job, do it well. I stocked shelves, got grocery buggies, and back in the day before we had scanners, it was working that checkout line, input and everything by hand. And, that teaches you a lot of responsibility. It also teaches you how to interact with people and how to treat people. And, I hope I learned that that at such a young age, and I've been able to carry that out through my life and my legal career.
Absolutely. Well, so you mentioned your kind of path through high school, Catholic education all the way, and then the next step comes, and it's a big public university. Tell us about that next chapter in life when you kind of left the nest and went to college.
Well, not everybody knows this about me. When I graduated St. Thomas, I was 100% sure that I wanted to be an engineer. And
Wow.
I was fortunate enough, I got a partial scholarship to Louisiana Tech up in Ruston. And I'll tell you, Parker, I took the engineering classes and I liked them. I've enjoyed math a little bit in high school, but I took a political science class. And it kind of opened my eyes about I'm in the wrong career.
Wow.
And
And so you started in engineering, I think, has the highest salary of any undergraduate curriculum.
Which is why I chose being. I wanted to be an engineer. It's like, hey, they're going to make a lot of money. But I was in that political science class with the professor, and I was a freshman. And I actually went and met with him after class, after about half a semester, and I said, look, I really think I'm in the wrong field. I think I want to go to law school. He says, well, you gotta make some decisions. And
right.
I called my dad and we talked about it. He said, well, if that's what you want to do, son, you need to come back home, go to Southeastern, get your undergrad, and then figure out where you want to go to law school after that. And that's what I did. I finished out the year at Louisiana Tech, came back to Southeastern and enrolled in the government history major and started focusing on getting ready to go to law school. And it was the best choice for me.
So you kind of knew early on, it sounds like freshman year of college, it clicked that, law is the thing. And at that point through political science at, pre-law level, you just kind of knew. Did you go straight from undergrad to law school, or did you take a gap year, or what happened there?
I thought about taking that gap year, but I was ready to move on and go to law school. I was fortunate my last year at Southeastern. I was involved in student government and things like that. I got a job working for late Senator John Hinkle. He was, I don't know if you're familiar with John, but
president
he was
of the
our
Senate.
state senator that kind
dear friend of our family.
Yeah, he crossed the lake and picked up this area and then had the New Orleans area. And a good friend of mine, Charles Chambers, got me a job as a legislative aide to John Hinkle running his Hammond office when I was a senior. And I was ready to get to law school so I could move on with the rest of my career.
Neat. And as I understand it, once you got out of law school, you actually worked for the legislature through the committee system. Is that right? Do I have that?
I did. I'd be remiss to say before I did that, though, I wasn't quite sure if that's what I wanted to do. And our local judge, Judge Brenda Bedsole Ricks, offered me a job as a law clerk, and I got to clerk for her for a while, and that exposed me to not just the local profession, but the inner workings of the court system, and that was a unique experience. But yes, after I clerked for her, I called up my good friend Senator Hinkle and said I really need a full-time job. And he was able to hook me up with Senator Ken Hollis. He's also, unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but he was the chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee.
Yeah, his son Michael was an old friend of mine. We used to do student council camps together, and once upon a time, the two of us and 3 or 4 other good buddies worked together in Europe. We were kind of camp counselors in Switzerland and Austria together. So I haven't seen Michael Hollis in probably a decade. But boy, we had some good memories. Senator Ken Hollis. That's 2 heavy hitters you're talking about there. John Hinkle, Ken Hollis. They were basically running the state, and what great mentors. And then also Judge Ricks. I mean, she's not only a wonderful woman, but an incredible jurist. She's so well respected. I think she's our senior most judge now. You can correct me if I'm wrong there. You would know. You're part of the club. But to have those 3 people at the beginning of your career, it had to be a tremendous influence, because I know you started in a great home with wonderful professional parents that, jumpstart you into life. But I'm not hearing any experience in the law between pharmacy and teaching English. So, you could have gone from a great house to a terrible position with a bad boss and maybe soured your career. But if you wouldn't mind, tell me something you learned from each of those three people, or a story you remember. Just what was their influence like on you?
Well, they all had a different influence. Senator Hinkle, if you remember him, he was the most outgoing, lovable, but intelligent person
Right.
that I'd ever been around, who had a true love for the state of Louisiana.
Absolutely.
And not to talk politics, but what I liked about Senator Hinkle that I learned from behind the scenes, it didn't matter your political affiliation. He wanted to work with you to try to figure out what he could do to better his community, better this state. And, that kind of carries through to the way I saw Senator Hollis and Judge Ricks interact with the public in maybe different ways. Judge Ricks taught me the value of being precise, following the law, and treating everybody with respect that comes before you. Senator Hollis was, like Senator Hinkle, passionate about the state and doing what was right. And just because we can't all agree on everything doesn't mean we can't try to work together. And I think that those three people taught me that.
Yeah, that's just great opportunities right out the chutes. And you kind of allude to some very different personalities there, from the understated, kind and kind of sweet heavyweight hitter like Judge Ricks on one hand, to on Hankel the other end of the spectrum, the most outspoken extrovert you'll ever see. I think he was the first guy to be elected Speaker of the House and then later President of the Senate. I remember him well as kind of our fraternity benefactor. He would buy kegs for the baseball games and just took good care of all us youngins there. He and my dad had attended Tulane together way back in the day and had been friends all those years. So when I arrived at the school 35, 40 years later, he always was looking out for me.
Oh,
And
he was passionate about Tulane. He loved Tulane.
He sure was. He helped. I think their baseball team was so good for so long back then, because in baseball you get like 12 scholarships. And Senator Hankel was able to, convince some friends to give some really good ball player scholarships over the years. And we were good. So thank you for bringing me down memory lane there. Here in Ponchatoula, people remember Senator Hankel well, not just as our very influential state senator for all those years, but he had a camp out at Ponchatoula Beach. He would rent one of the cabins from the Wells family, and he was just a fixture. We all loved him. And that's really neat. So you get out of law school, and like me, we went to LSU Law. I think you left LSU Law the year before I arrived, so I was kind of on your heels, but we didn't really know each other then. You mentioned going to work for Judge Ricks, working in the legislative, committee. When did you decide to make that shift to a private practice and coming home here to the 21st JDC and your home in Hammond?
Yeah, I've truly enjoyed my time at the legislature. But if you've ever had any experience with the legislature, particularly when they're in session, it's grueling hours.
Yes.
There's nothing wrong with hard work, but I had gotten married to my wife, Allison, and frankly,
now, Allison, I do remember from high school. She's my age. So first of all, congrats on that. You and I both know something about outkicking our coverage. You married very well, Your Honor.
Absolutely. No, she is definitely my better half. She makes me a better person every day. But we were ready to grow our family, and it was going to be tough commuting back and forth. So we were going to have to make some decisions. If I was going to stay in my job at Baton Rouge, we were talking about maybe moving over there, and neither one of us really thought that was desirable. We both loved home. She grew up in Hammond. Her mom's from Independence, and her grandfather had a pharmacy in Independence, and my parents were here. So I made the hard decision to leave the legislature, and fortunately, I was able to get a job working at a local law firm out in Albany, where I was
you and your good friend Sherman Mack basically built what I was probably the biggest small town firm around. I mean, Albany, it makes Ponchatoula look like Manhattan in some ways. And yet you guys were blowing and going out there. I never forget the first time I visited y'all out there, you were expanding offices. You had a fleet of excellent assistants. What was that like? One, being on that journey with a close friend like Sherman, but two, building such a big practice in a small town. What was that like as an experience?
Look, all credit to that goes to Sherman. He and I were friends and knew each other in at Southeastern. He took a gap year after we graduated and went to work to pay for law school. I fortunately went straight to law school. We reconnected through our wives. They actually had both worked together at Neal Corporation back in the day, and he was growing. He needed some help, so he reached out to me, and I'm glad he did, because despite the fact that I truly love my job at the legislature, I was ready to make that transition back home, and he gave me an opportunity to go work for him and do the things that helped me get to where I'm at today.
Yeah, that's really neat. And you mentioned Allison's roots. I didn't realize her grandmother was from Independence. I knew we shared a common thread in that we married Sicilians.
Yeah, her grandparents were the Cacheras, who owned the
yeah, great
Benny
family.
Cachera, who
Okay,
owned the pharmacy over there.
very neat. Well, I talked to my Independence father-in-law today, and so we spent a lot of time up that way. My wife's family still lives there, and it's always neat to kind of see the connections here as these families come together. So Allison, in her own right, has been extraordinarily successful in real estate. I know that's, as you mentioned, she was at Neal back in the day, but can we take a quick, moment and kind of as a sideline, let's plug your beautiful and successful wife. What's it like being the husband to such a, a renowned and successful realtor? Does that take some of your time? Do you ever go to her open houses, or how does that work?
No, I let her do the real estate. Allison is, if you know Allison, not only is she very good at her job, she is the most happy, energetic person that I know.
Yeah.
And like I told you,
Always
when
has
I mean,
been.
when I mean she's my better half, she makes me a better person because of who she is. She pushes me, she pushes herself, and she does that for her clients. I mean, she is there 24/7 to try to help them find the perfect home, or help them sell that house. I couldn't be more proud of her. She is a fantastic person, mother, wife, and real estate agent.
Well, I'm smiling big because as you describe her and what she does for you, it reminds me so much of what my wife Brandy does for me, because I would say the same about her. And Allison really is this bubbly, it's like when you meet her, you want to smile with her, right? I mean, if you're having a bad day, it's a little bit or maybe a lot better because you came across her, and she's always had that kind of effect. And so I'm just really so happy that the two of you found each other, because as I've gotten to know you over the years, you every bit deserve a wife like her, someone who is so uplifting and moral and loyal and wonderful. And so, it's kind of like good for each of you. It's kind of a fun, happy love story to witness from the sidelines for those of us that are friends of yours. So let's talk about the next kind of career path. How does this opportunity to become a judge come up? And of course, you and Allison, I'm sure, had big talks about that, because you're going from something that's kind of a known entity. You've got a little boy at that time. You're kind of, thinking about joining the bench. It's a brand new judgeship, as I recall. So we didn't even really know what family court in Tangi and Livingston and St. Helena would be like. Would you mind taking us down that road and telling the story of how attorney Oglesbee became Judge Oglesbee?
Yeah, part of my practice with Sherman was doing criminal, but mostly a lot of family court cases. I left the personal injury to folks like you. It's just that wasn't something that I was very good at. Let's just say.
Well, I don't know if I believe that, but I'm glad you picked a different lane, because that probably meant more cases for the rest of us. Thank you.
But in 2013, another figure from the Ponchatoula area, Judge Ernie Drake, who was also a fantastic district court judge, decided to move up to the First Circuit Court of Appeals, which was going to leave a vacancy in his office. I went and talked to Judge Drake before I made my decision to run and to get some advice. What the local bench had decided to do, if you recall, at that time we didn't have a family court. So we were going to take his division and Judge Zoe Wagensback's division and turn those into strictly family court divisions.
Oh, now that you refreshed my memory, because I've forgotten that. Somehow I thought we created new judgeships, but it was a conversion. You're right.
Yeah. So we did. They had gone to the legislature to do that, and because I had such a strong desire to do the family court practice, I thought that was something that I might be able to be good at. When I decided to run, I talked to obviously my friends, my colleagues, but most importantly to my wife, to make sure that was something she was comfortable with. And she was, fortunately, she was a big help and an asset to me when I ran for that particular office. And, as they say, it's the history's in the books there,
Yeah, that you won 3 elections with her by your side. So something's working, right?
Yeah. But it was nice to be able to go into the family court with my experience practicing in front of all of our different judges. Back before we had the dedicated family court, all of our judges at that time would do a rotation where they would do criminal, general civil, as well as the family court. So I had an opportunity to practice in front of each one of those judges doing these family cases. So what that allows you to do is pick up the best traits of each one of them and kind of combine it into this new family court. So when I took over Judge Drake's division in January of 2014, I had an idea of how I was going to incorporate those different ideas so that we could run the family court a little bit smoother. And I think we do a pretty good job in the 21st Judicial District Court with our family court. And it's not just because of me, it's because of Judge Cash. It's because of our hearing officers, Patricia Hicks and Carolyn Ott, who really help us move our family cases. And I don't mean move it like it's a factory line, but I've always had a desire to try to help people resolve their conflicts as quickly as possible. Right. If that's the right thing to do for that family. And that's why I think a lot of family court cases are time sensitive. Back when we did that rotation, you might go 6 to 8 weeks between getting to see a judge. Well, if a family's going through a crisis where they're separating, they need to get in front of somebody to help them resolve that conflict, even if it's on just an interim basis to give them some relief, so everybody can take a breath and calm down, and they know, hey, I get to do this on this day, or this is my responsibility. We're kind of dividing that up. So I like to try to get people in court, at least to have that initial conversation as quickly as we can.
And I love to see you sharing the credit with your appointed hearing officers. You and Judge Cash were elected. You're full district judges with all the powers that, as you mentioned, Judge Drake, Judge Ricks, and the other district judges have. But these hearing officers, as I understand, it's kind of a newer concept. They're appointed by the court. They're not elected by the people, but they do super important work. And we've had Trish Hicks is my neighbor. I can see her house from the window right here outside my home office. She's a wonderful woman. She's been on the show. So if anybody's interested in learning more about her, you can look at her episode. But I think, or I gather, because you're talking to a guy that's never practiced in family court and didn't even take family law in law school. So I probably never will be before your court. But I gather from my friends that do that kind of work like you did, that it's a fairly thankless job. Heck, your job's a thankless job, and you get to wear the black robe and bang the gavel and have all the honor that goes with being your honor. So it's neat to see you kind of embrace this whole team and share that credit. And I applaud you for it. And I'll say, Jeff, it doesn't surprise me, though, because, I don't know if our listeners and viewers realize as we're recording this, it's flu season. I was in the pediatrician the other day with my kids, and she was telling me that, man, there's flu, there's RSV, there's pneumonia, there's all these viruses around the Hammond-Ponchatoula area right now. But there's a little known virus that lawyers are very familiar with called judge-itis. And what I think lawyers mean by that is you kind of never know how somebody's going to be when they get the black robe and the gavel and become a judge. Plenty of really nice, kind lawyers have let the job go to their head. We can all safely say now that you, Judge Oglesbee, have never caught judge-itis. You've been on the bench over a decade, and, you're as nice as the day, you were elected. And I admire that, because it's got to be tough. It's probably harder to make new friends once you are a judge and people have, angles and kiss your butt or whatnot. So anyway, I just want to say congratulations on that as an observation, as your friend, because, I've seen other people maybe not go that way. What's it like?
Thank you.
How do you feel? Did you feel different? Oh, please go ahead.
I try to stay humble on the bench. I try to put myself in, remember when it was like practicing law. You and the other lawyers, you have difficult jobs. You have an obligation to represent the law but also represent your client. And I appreciate lawyers who come into court who are prepared, who advocate for their client, but at the same time, they adhere to the law. They follow the law, and they're honest with their clients. This is the law. Going to follow the law. I know this is what you want, but the judge is going to follow the law. So I know you've got a difficult job, as do all the other lawyers who practice in front of me.
Well, thank you for saying that. What's it like from the bench? Would you mind sharing with us kind of maybe a typical day in family court? Because, it occurs to me that most people don't know what it's like in there. They're fortunate if they never have to go there. But even those that have been, maybe only went for one hearing to decide one issue, and they don't have any real idea for what the family court's doing, the judge and your team of employees. But what's it like up there day to day?
Yeah, I would say I have, I would call them two different but typical days. Obviously, my busiest day is my rule day. And a rule day is you file an initial pleading. I give you a rule day to come into court, and there may be 50, 60, 70 people on my docket. And it may be short matters like we just need to confirm a divorce that takes about 5 minutes. They may be more longer matters like a rule for contempt where someone has alleged to have violated one of my judgments. So we may have to have a hearing on that. But more often than not, it's these initial settings where someone's coming into court for the very first time. They're either represented by an attorney or they can represent themselves. And we try to give them some guidance about how to proceed from there going forward. If both sides are represented by a lawyer, a lot of times they'll ask for a status conference. And, I know some people may wonder, what are we doing back there? But it's an opportunity for the lawyers to come back in my office, and they each kind of tell me their side of the case, and I can make recommendations based upon what they're telling me to try to help them resolve their case. If you're not represented by a lawyer, that's where our hearing officers will typically come in, and they'll meet with you and kind of do the same thing and try to help you come up with some resolutions. And at the end of the day, if we're not able to reach a resolution, then that's where we move on and give you that trial date down the road. And that brings me to, my other second typical day would be my trial days. More often than not, we can try to litigate your trial in a half a day to a full day. I mean, I'm happy to give people as much time as they need to present their case, but I've found in the last 11 years that most cases can resolve in either a full day or a half a day. And what I like to do before a trial is I go through all the pleadings that have been filed from day one up until the trial date, so I can make sure that I'm familiar with everything about that particular case that's in the public record. So I'm not going into it cold, and then we'll have our trial.
I'm glad you shared that last part, because having worked for a judge, not a family court judge, but a federal judge, one of the things I noticed was how hard good judges work long before they put on the robe and walk into the courtroom, so that you are prepared. Folks don't always realize that your lawyers file these pleadings, and these are legal documents, but usually attached to them are tons of evidence and testimony, sometimes if they're depositions and whatnot. And I think people sometimes, assume judges are just kind of willy-nilly ruling from the bench, but you may have already read all this stuff, prepared for this, maybe even talked to the lawyers in a status conference. So if you come in there and a hearing seems short, it's not because you're not giving it deep thought or much reflection. It's because you spent hours beforehand reading and writing and thinking about what you're going to do so that you're ready to roll. Is that right? I mean,
yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I'm fortunate not just to have the hearing officers, but I have a law clerk who also kind of helps me brief everything so that I'm familiar going into even my status conferences on an initial setting, kind of what the basics are of the case. What's a timeline? When did folks get married? How old are their children? What are we having a discussion about today? Are there things that they can reach an agreement on that they don't need my help with? If I can narrow it down to one or two really hot button issues, I think that really streamlines it. So yeah, when I say that it takes a half a day, and people may be a little surprised that that's how short a custody trial or some other family law dispute would be handled. It's because we've streamlined it down to just a few difficult areas.
Right. And folks probably don't realize that a lot of what they're mad about is not relevant to what the law says you must decide on, right? I mean, these are the criteria for custody or support or whatever you're disputing. You as a judge are going to focus in on those things that are legally relevant and not get caught up in, the quagmire of everything else.
Look, I look at family law maybe a little differently than other areas of the law. And there's black and white legislation or statutes that I have to follow. But family law, to me, there's a lot of gray area. Typically you're dealing with two really good people who are just going through a crisis in their life. And I'm probably seeing the worst side of their personalities when they come to court because they're in that crisis. And I try to remember that. I try to look at, particularly when we're dealing with custody, my number one overriding rule is what's in the best interest of their children. And I've always said from day one, the hardest cases for me to make a decision on are when I've got a really good mom and a really good dad who just for whatever reason cannot get along. Trying to come up with a custodial plan that is in the best interest of the child. And Parker, I'll be the first one to tell you, I try to make the very best decision based upon the information that's presented to me.
Well, that's all
I hope I get it right more often than not. But if I get it wrong, I've told people, bring it back to me. Tell me where I got it wrong. Let's see if we can fix it.
Yeah, well, that's one of the beauties of the system is that while that ruling is the law and it's in place with full effect when you make it, it can be amended. There is a process. If circumstances change, people can come back and present it to you again. And if there's new evidence or new law or some new light in any way, they can get another crack at it, which differs from areas like mine. I mean, in my personal injury world, we have one trial. We win, we lose, we go home. Of course, there's an appellate process, but that doesn't mean new trial. It's over. In your world, there is kind of a second bite at the apple, so to speak, sometimes. I can see, I know in you and know how much you care about your work. I realize how hard that decision is for you. But I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine who's recently became a federal judge, and he's now tasked with sentencing these really, bad crimes and instances. And, it's easy. And I've been through that as a law clerk, but, I told him, I said, Judge, there's just no way for me to know as the guy who's recommending this sentence what it feels like to be the guy, as Ned Stark might say in Game of Thrones, swinging the sword, actually making that. For you, you're making these decisions. It's got to be gut wrenching when great dad meets great mom and, War of the Roses, they can't get along. How do you personally, grapple with that to get home? Because I've seen you in social settings. I've never watched you in action in court, but I see you out with your wife, with your children. You're such a great dad, husband, etc. How do you ease that burden on yourself of, kind of tough decisions and tough stuff you watch that day?
Well, I can't say that it's always easy. You leave court sometimes, and you have those difficult conversations with yourself. Like I said, I try to make the best decision based upon the information that's presented to me, and I have to live with that. That's what I signed up for. That's the job, is to get up there and to make the decisions, and live with the outcome. It's not always easy days, but more often than not, I'll be honest, we have a really, really strong group of lawyers who practice in the 21st Judicial District Court, and they make my job easier because they're so prepared, because they really try to resolve the majority of the conflicts with their colleagues. It makes the job a little bit easier.
That's great. What a blessing. And I got to say, I admire you for taking on that challenge. Everybody that works in places like the court system, or like my brother and father, law enforcement, or like my wife in social services, Brandy, as a school counselor, deals with some really tough stuff. And she'll come home on days when she's worked with, kids who are, threatening to commit suicide, or kids just going through the worst stuff, horrible home lives, etc. And she's somehow able to invest in them and handle what they need and give them the counseling they need in that moment with genuine interest and empathy. But when she gets home, she's able to, somehow flip a switch and be a great mama and not let it drag down, this happy life we have here. And I admire you for doing that and her for doing that.
Well, it
Go ahead.
certainly helps to come home to my wife, who's always so positive, and my kids who give me plenty of distractions.
Well, tell us about that, because you have this wonderful wife that I know well. Like me, I'm not going to call you an old dad, although I consider myself one. And you've got a big space between your two children.
I do.
But tell me about what that level of family life has added to your life. We kind of touched on how Allison came into your life and made you a better man. That's what I think you said. Tell me about these kiddos and the impact they've had on you, and how, I can tell it's fun for you like it is for me, being, one of the dads around here, even though we're not 22 and doing it,
I became a dad with my son Zach 16 years ago, and it was a little bit, I won't call it a struggle, but we did go through some things to have Zach, and we thought he was going to be our only child, and man, we went that way for a good 10 years, just the three of us, and it was wonderful. He taught me how to be patient. He taught me about enjoying the little things in life, and it's been a pleasure watching him grow up to be such a wonderful young man. And then 5 years ago, God had other plans for us and blessed us with my youngest son, Grant. And you're right, there's that big age gap between the two of them. And it's starting all over, but you have two boys, you know what it's like probably. They both have such uniquely different personalities. I'd say Zach's kind of like a little bit more my personality, a little bit more laid back, and Grant's got his mama's personality. He's ready to go every day. So it's fun.
That's really cool. Well, tell me this. And I promise I respect your time, and so we're close to being done. But before we do, I want to circle back to your career as a judge on the family court bench.
Yeah.
You clearly love your job, and I know this because every time there's a bigger, technically higher clerk, judgeship, whether it's Supreme Court or Court of Appeals or et cetera, the lawyers get to chirping about who's it going to be, and the rumor gets running, and everybody's like, "Oh, Judge Oglesbee is going to do it," And it seems like every time I speak to you, you're like, "I love the job I have. I'm not going anywhere. This is the job I want." And I'm not here asking you to comment on your political future or plans. I'm asking about, where does that love for your job come from? What do you love about your job? Because it's clear to me in the conversations you and I have privately had about this, you're passionate about being a family court judge, and the work that you do is not only important to you, it's something that gives you a great sense of purpose, and you just like it. So what do you love so much about this?
It's interesting, going back through my legal career, that public service that I witnessed from Senator Hinkle and Senator Hollis from that legislative end. As a family court judge, I feel like I can offer that same type of public service, just in a different arena. And I'm really passionate about trying to help families get through this difficult time in their life. I can't promise you that it's going to be any better, but I try to make it as easy as possible. And that's what I like about how we have it set up now here in the 21st Judicial District Family Court. It's a little bit different across the state. Not everybody does it the same way that we do. But with our hearing officers doing that voluntary mediation, they're able to help people maybe take a breath and calm down and resolve their conflicts. And, I've enjoyed the work for the last 11 years. The folks in the 21st Judicial District see fit to keep me, I'd like to keep doing it for another 11 years.
They better, because we're lucky to have you. But speaking of the 21st Judicial District and its court, you will soon become the chief judge. And so your role will change a bit. Would you mind sharing with the people what that is and what that means for you in the court?
Yeah. If you're familiar, Judge, we had a long time serving judge, Judge Robert Morrison, who was our chief judge for a very long time and did a fantastic job. 4 years ago, when Judge Morrison retired, we kind of decided as a bench that we were going to rotate that responsibility based upon seniority. So Judge Rick served as our chief judge for 2 years. Judge Blair Edwards was the next most senior judge. She served that responsibility for 2 years, and now it's my turn. And chief judge, it's got a nice sounding title, but really it's making sure that the court runs smoothly. I work with our judicial administrator, Bo Coxon, to make sure that everything's taken care of behind the scenes, things that you may not know about. Working with our sheriffs, working with our district attorney, working with our clerks to make sure that everything runs smoothly from an administrative standpoint, and also helping him oversee the court employees. I'm looking forward to some additional challenges as chief judge. Parker, I don't have to tell you, you ride around here, this area has grown exponentially.
Absolutely.
Back when I graduated law school, we had just added 2 divisions of the court. So we had eight judges. Mm-hmm. Shortly thereafter, we added Judge Edwards in 2008 as our first juvenile court judge. So we were up to 9 judges. Just this last year, I was fortunate to be able to work with Representative Muscarello, Representative Carter, in bringing a 10th judge to the bench, Judge Belzer, who will be getting sworn in January. And this is all attributable to the growth of our area.
Right.
More people means more cases, which means we need a little bit larger bench to make sure these things, so your case doesn't get carried over for 3, 4, 5 years. We're able to move people through the process a little bit further. So we're going to maintain the 6 general, civil, and criminal judges. We'll have 2 family court judges. We'll continue to have a juvenile court judge who's going to be running in March for Judge Edwards' position. And then Judge Belzer, our newest judge, is going to handle a hybrid of criminal and juvenile work going forward for at least the next 3 years.
Yeah. And you're right about, the importance of responding to the need of a growing community, because what happens when you have too many people for too few judges, the backlog, you can only handle so many cases. In an 8-hour workday on the bench, you can only hear so many cases, and it creates delays. And everybody knows the quote, justice delayed is justice denied. If a family can't get to the family court judge to have this custody heard, bad things happen for them. In my world, people who get injured need their day in court so they can recover the money to go pay for their medical bills and get their life back on track. All these different things happen in the court. These are just 2 of many things that you process there. So it's neat to see a growing court. And it's also kind of cool to see that you guys have a plan and you've kind of triaged things. Like you said, when you got out of law school, or even maybe when I got out of law school, those 8 judges had to do it all. There was no specialization. So family got put on a circuit, so to speak, that was really spread out. And they probably, not to besmirch any of the judges, they were great. You and I grew up practicing in front of those guys, but it's hard to be great at 10 things. It's much easier to be great at one thing. And maybe they weren't as good at family law when it was one of, 10 different major practice areas. So I think it's great the direction you guys have taken this.
You're right. We've been blessed in this area to have some really fantastic judges, including our judges that are on the bench now. I think they're all great at what they do. What this system allows us to do, you're right, is I can focus solely on making sure that I'm up to date on everything there is about family law, where Judge Ricks can make sure that she knows everything she needs to know about criminal law and her general civil law. And then Judge Edwards, when she, as a juvenile court judge, her sole focus was on juvenile court. So that allows us to become more specialized in that, in those particular areas. And it's not to say that the judges before me did it wrong. They did the very best they could. They just had so much on their plate. And this way we can focus, focus the bench on different areas.
People are better served in the process. That's great. So Judge, I thank you for your patience. I'm about to wind down with 2 final questions here, then let you get back to that beautiful family of yours. First, I want to ask you a question that really pertains to young people that maybe want to be you when they grow up. They might want to be successful lawyers who become judges. If you were to speak to some young kid, maybe a college kid who's studying political science at Southeastern like you once did, or maybe a law student or a young lawyer, but anybody who says, hey, Judge, I'd like to be like you one day. How do you become a judge? How do you become a top flight lawyer? What would you tell them about how to get from where they are to where you are?
I think probably the best advice I could give somebody would be focus on what you want to be when you grow up. If you want to be a lawyer, then be dedicated to that. Study that, focus on it, learn you can about it. But if you're not, like I told you, I started off college thinking I wanted to be this great engineer, but I was open to the idea of doing something different.
Right.
I don't want to get too religious, but I do believe that God plays a very important part in each one of our lives.
Amen.
And you have to be open to when he talks to you and point you in these directions. I can think back on various times in my life now at 51 years old where he absolutely had an influence in my life. Hey, Jeff, you're in the wrong career. You need to go to this career. Hey, there's that girl over there. You need to go talk to her and get to know her. Different things like that. So I truly believe that. So I think you need to be dedicated on what you choose to do with this life, but also be open to the possibility that, maybe there's a different direction for you.
Yeah. Well, your career and life and mine are also an exercise in what you're saying in that old Garth Brooks song about unanswered prayers, right?
Yes,
because
absolutely.
Once upon a time, I wanted to be a pediatrician. And for me, that stopped when I made a D in chemistry my first year at Tulane. I'm not talking organic chem. I'm talking plain old chemistry for dummies. And thank God that happened, right? But he had a different plan. Not just for my professional life, but my dating life. And he knows far better than we do what's best for us. And
that's right.
Judge, I just want to thank you for sharing that. The last question I'll end on is this. Is there anything we haven't covered? Anything on your mind, on your heart, just anything at all that you'd like to share with our viewers and our listeners before we go?
Yeah, no, nothing in particular, but I would like to tell the folks who are listening that the 21st Judicial District Court, not only do we offer, the courtroom services, but we have a lot of specialized courts to try to help people that are in crisis. Judge Abels and Judge Dykes run our Veterans Court. They do a fantastic job working with veterans who are going through some type of crisis in their lives. We also have an adult and a juvenile drug court to try to help people work through those particular issues. Judge Cash has talked to me about maybe starting a family resource court to try to help people. So we do more than just try, guilty or innocent, this or that. We do try to help people that are going through crisis with our specialty courts. So if you need help, reach out. If you want to help, reach out. If you're a veteran and you want to be a mentor to someone, contact the court system. We'd love to have you. If you want to help children going through the juvenile court system, I just went to a fundraiser in St. Francisville for our CASA system.
CASA, yeah.
And they do a wonderful job being an advocate for children. If you feel called to do that, reach out to those folks. There are people that are there to help. We need help. If there's folks out there who feel called to do that, we would love to have you.
Thank you for mentioning that. My mother volunteered as a CASA, and my wife worked for the organization as a social worker, and it's incredibly important. These kids need people to volunteer, and it's so neat that the court is meeting charities like that and seeing needs, be it with veterans or drug addicted or kids. These people in life that are sometimes marginalized because they've got problems or challenges. They have those special challenges require special needs, and it's really neat to see a modern court system like yours meet that. Folks, I can tell you the 21st Judicial District Court of Louisiana, which is Tangipahoa Parish, Livingston Parish, and St. Helena, it's got an excellent website. So Google it, check it out. I'm sure you'll find links to contacts on where you can do what Judge Oglesbee has suggested. Judge, thank you for your time. We've gone over, and for that, I beg your apologies, and I thank you for your patience. To our viewers, I want to thank y'all for sticking with us to the end. We'll be back next week. Y'all take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.